Welcome to Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald. Hey, that's me. Hi, and welcome to Positive Talk. Our show features the best positive stories and people from around the globe as we endeavor to answer the universal question of why am I here and what is my purpose? Understanding that can change everything, and knowing your greatness is fundamental to living your best life. So join us right now as together we work to create the adventure of our lifetime. Well, and we're rewriting the rules today because normally I'm up there and now I'm down here and I get to look up at these guys and stuff. And we have a great guest for you today because she's teaching people how to rewrite the rules and to lead without compromise and to become your very own, dare I say it, your very own powerhouse. Rochelle, welcome. How are you?
Hi, Kevin. I'm very good. I'm very excited to finally be here and not stressed out by the thunder anymore that has passed through. And we have an amazing guest. We have Sam Jump here today. Go to her website. I have to tell you, Sam, this website is extraordinary. The fact that you made it 3D and the way it moves around and the bottom comes up and there's still a background, it changes, is amazing. But go check it out, everybody. It's powerhouseswithpurpose.com. And yeah, we'll just welcome here. And how are you?
I'm doing great. Yeah, it's been a nice little breezy day and excited to chat with you guys and see what comes up and what we get to share with the community.
We get to share all kinds of stuff. First of all, where are you that it's breezy?
Breezy is in the internal choice of preference for how I related to the day, but I live in Nashville, Tennessee.
It's beautiful. We have a bunch of people that have been on the show and are friends of the show that live in Nashville and the surrounding.
Yeah. I just moved back after being gone for about 6.5 years. So my husband and I just got here in March. So after that long and with the momentum that's behind Nashville's growth, it's like a totally new city in so many ways and, scratches that itch for newness and new experiences, but also has the supportive roots here. It's great. I definitely miss being in this region.
Well, good for you, because it's and now you've been getting a lot of rain in there that I've been watching the news. Is that true?
It's been a rainier year, but I think we've kind of also been in a pocket where there's been like a lot of rain in all directions of us, but here in Nashville, it hasn't been too crazy. I mean, there's definitely been flood years in Nashville, but thank goodness this hasn't been one of them. But I know Chattanooga just got hit. Obviously Asheville more recently, so all in proximity, but nothing crazy here in town.
Oh, very good. Now tell us about your work and what you do for fun and excitement with people.
Yeah, so I mean, for fun and excitement, I help other people recognize where their personal power lies. I help them do that by, mirroring the things that they're saying and what they're, really trying to say and inviting those things out that are really trying to be brought out into the world. And I call that fun and I call that play because it's all rooted in curiosity, right? So, we can't realize what's actually behind our words or what's behind our actions if we're not slowing down and being curious. So, curiosity is a form of creativity and play, but it's also at the root of the work that I do and the space that I hold for leaders of all types. And it's a gift to have that be the case for me.
And you make people think more deeply about what it is that they are saying, and is what they're saying actually really what they mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. Is it your story, or are you kind of just regurgitating the narratives that you're having fed to you day in and day out? Is this what you're actually here to put out into the world, or are you bypassing your actual power and potency for changing the way things are in your environment internally and outside?
Yeah, that's true. I have to say that it's crazy too, because I see a lot of people that will be in conversations or something is going on and it's literally just because of a misunderstanding. And a lot of times, even if a person is trying to say something but says something else, and the person who's listening takes what they said and what they literal as what they heard, not what the other person meant, it's like running into a million brick walls back to back to back to back to back in a conversation. Is there ways that you help people try to recognize that from the get so it doesn't get to that point?
Yeah, I mean, realistically, everything, when it comes down to it, whenever we're paying attention to our actions and our thoughts, our words, when we're paying attention to the why behind it all, we have to slow down to do that. And I think in communication too, we can have all the intention in the world, but we can never have a say really in how others perceive what we say. At that point in time, there are some points of that that are kind of unavoidable in communication. You know, everyone has their own toolbox, everyone has their own, you know, programming that they were raised through and what communication and clear communication actually means, right? So it's more about, you know, if you know what your intentions are and you know, and you're rooted in your habits for how you choose to show up in the world, you know, that's the first step of it. But then it's like any kind of other, again, you know, any kind of other creation, once you put it out into the world, you kind of have to let go as far as how other people are going to receive and respond to it. And at that point in time, regardless of their response or reaction, all you have a say in at that point is how you then step into the game. Like, what's your volley? How are you responding from that point in time? And again, like, if you're going back to, you continue to return to your roots that are your values and how, again, you choose to show up in the world, then you know what, you're at least doing your part. You can't do your part, you know, the part of other people. If other people have a tendency to be more reactive to, you know, what other people say, or they choose to take it personally, or, you know, they have a habit of putting a victimhood spin on things, we have nothing that we can do in those cases. So, you know, taking ownership for what we're contributing and also being able to let go and surrender to the things that we don't have a say over.
Very good.
You just said a whole bunch of things that we need to talk about because so many of us, yes. Well, and so many of us never take the time to determine for ourselves, to have that conversation with ourselves. Okay, so what did I mean by that? Or why do I think this way? Or is that my mom speaking or is that me speaking?
Right.
Or all of those things. And we don't sometimes, without somebody to mirror back to us what they heard us say, we don't even think that what we said was as incomplete or not factual as it turned out to be when it hit somebody else's ears. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the things that we say go through their own filter and their own net, but then the things that are received, it doesn't really matter the net that they went through in the first place. They're filtered through a totally separate net by the receiver of that. So it's, you know, and I mean, a lot of times it's like playing a different game, you know. It's not even like we're both playing soccer and we both have soccer nets. Like, some people are using a lacrosse net for a soccer ball, and you know, it's just hard to play a fair game. Or, you know, if everybody's like, oh, if everybody could just communicate clearly and, you know, mean what they say and say what they mean. But that's not necessarily the case, because even the people who do a lot of times get caught up in that because of the learned behaviors, or like you said, you know, whose net am I receiving that through? Am I receiving that, you know, am I reacting from a place of what I witnessed in my mother for 20 years and how she chooses to react to things in life? Or am I consciously like standing in who I choose to be and letting myself, you know, activate the power of the pause and choose to make sure that my words are from compassion and understanding and not trigger and activation? And so I think it, you know, there are so many levels of that, and it really does take slowing down and taking inventory of our habits, and, you know, of our subconscious habits, of our conscious habits. There's so many layers to it. And I think that's why, you know, I've been doing this work for so long now that the layers have accumulated with time. The idea of digging into all of this on your own, especially, and expecting it to all change overnight, it's literally impossible. And so that's why, you know, being able to slow down and have a mentor who can, you know, guide us, or mentors, you know, really ideally, right, that can guide us through the different levels of, you know, these identity level shifts. Like, who do I want to be in this world? Who do I want to be in these relationships or in my leadership? You know, it really does take guidance and someone who can reflect onto us how we're showing up in the world. There are times that even with me, and I consider myself deep in my practice, but I will have a subconscious tone that is more reflective of the tone of the households that I grew up in, that just comes out when I'm a certain point of triggered. And I don't like it. I will hear it after the fact. But it's a thing too, that if I choose to just go into like, oh, so bummed that happened, I have to then choose to also go and treat that with love, right? I have to go and I have to be able to still honor and appreciate that part of myself, as I would if someone else were hitting me with that. Again, like, how do I want to show up in the world? Like, that's a practice that we have to be doing with ourselves, which is constant work, so that we can really like strengthen our muscle and how we're showing up with other people.
And Rochelle, that never happens to you, does it?
Oh, never. It's not like every single day, I'm just kidding. No, there's also no flow in it. And that's okay too. You have days or hours or weeks sometimes that it's just a little more pushing and the pulling. But you mentioned something so specific, and you said pausing. It seems so simple, yes.
Right.
But when you finally get yourself to pause, there's so much happening. And even people around you may not even see it. I've had this recently where I've had two people that are in my everyday life, and something happened that usually would have made me have some sort of negative reaction. And I just didn't react at all. And it doesn't mean that it didn't affect me. There was still so much going on, but it was like a split second light bulb in my head that was like, damn, I chose to react to all these things all my life. And it really just made it worse when it was already bad. But the pause, there's so much with that, like, what's your perspective?
I feel like the pause is an instant diffuser of whatever is going on. And I feel like sometimes, that can even be from a place of like, just an overaccumulation of energy, even if it's like heightened and celebratory, like sporting events where everybody's so stoked that it becomes destructive because there's too much of it. So it's like anything can really benefit from having a little bit of diffusing on that. And it feels like, it's always felt like the power of the pause. For other people who might expect a certain reaction from you, that pause might seem scary. Like, wait a minute, should I be worried? And then, but how good it feels inside and how proud of ourselves we can feel when we're like, oh, holy crap, like I just did it, and instead of like being triggered and being activated, I'm witnessing myself choosing a different neural pathway that helps me show up in the way that I would want to, which is giving myself that moment to take a breath and check in ever so slightly, just to make sure that how I'm choosing to respond versus react is how I want to contribute to what's going on right now.
Well, and I have to say, when you said diffusing, that was powerful, because it's almost like I started to come down from the levels that I go through from 0 to 10 when I see something I can't control and it makes me want to freak out. But it was so powerful, because then it made me want to cry, really. It made me sad, because that was the underlying feeling that I'm probably usually going through, is sadness, but it goes straight to anger. And I can't think that I can control it. But then I'm like, wait, I can though, because if I have the choice, like you said, to take it this way, then why wouldn't I try a different way? But it made me want to cry.
Yeah. And, anger doesn't really feel good. For the people who say it does, like, that's also a coping mechanism for your internal safety. But anger doesn't really feel good, especially if it's toward the people that we care so much about. But it's less vulnerable than what sadness is, right? And I think that, I've learned the hard way over the years that anger is really just a messenger for the edges that I'm being pushed toward. So, but a lot of times there are those other emotions that have quietly been trying to relay to us under the surface, but anger is so loud and unignorable. We feel it, right? And it's something that it also helps to really alert the people around us that I'm at that edge. And so, I mean, it makes total sense that for so many of us that, once we've been suppressing sadness or other more vulnerable feelings for so long that it reaches a point of anger or frustration, aggression, it just makes sense from a point of alchemy or, lack of higher frequency emotions, why things like anger are just right there and ready. And there's so much of it in our culture, right? So many people are just like, we're being fed so much that is intended to stir anger in us. So it's almost like our anger muscles are regularly being invited to get stronger and more at the ready, just ready to go. And so I think that's, why it's so important that we're being mindful of what we consume and we're mindful of what we watch and what we listen to, because if it's stuff that's only stirring anger and feeding frequencies of anger, then of course that's what we're going to, be regurgitating back out into it. Like we are constantly in that place of reflection.
And if I could just insert this, please, for all the ladies out there that are going home and having a discussion with their husband. And because what ends up happening with us is we will be listening along, and then at one point in time, we tend to tune out because we've either heard it before or it's just a continuation. But if she pauses and resets, that gives us the clear signal, oh, something important is about to be said. I should probably pay attention now, or I'm going to regret it later. Do you agree with that? Oh, but before you answer that, I need to take a break, and because that answer is going to take a couple of minutes, I got a feeling. And Rochelle's here, and Sam Jump is here. My name is Kevin, and we're going to take this quick break, and we'll be right back. And she's going to give us some interesting observations about pausing. And for effect. It's an old acting term is what that is. And it works really well. We'll be right back.
You became a real estate agent for freedom, success, and real momentum. So why are you still stuck waiting for closings to save you? I'm Ophir Adar, founder of Real Momentum, and I help agents like you become seven-figure earners. My first client that I coached, brand new agent, made $250,000 back in 2006. What's the secret? You feed your white wolf. That's the part of you that's bold and unstoppable and a closer and able to build rapport quickly. So click Get Listings at Real Momentum and let's unleash your real estate potential.
And welcome back to Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald. Rochelle is here, and Sam Jump is here, and Sam. So I got to ask you: and what do they call it? What do they call it a pregnant pause? Does that make sense? Is that an effective way of regathering your thoughts and then regaining the edge in the communication with somebody who may have tuned you out?
Yeah, I think that, and I think that even just giving ourselves a chance to digest what was just said. And I think that a lot of times, we can be so wound up in the momentum of a day, or Kevin, like you said, the example was like coming home from work, again, the end of a day, likely including traffic and, including gossip, including the stuff that you're hearing on the radio. There are a lot of emotions that are swirling that aren't necessarily yours. And then you get into a situation where you're having a conversation that you just might not have the energy for. And, again, going back to most people aren't taught effective communication or nonviolent communication. So people are just doing what they have the energy for. They're doing, communicating based on what they know. And so I think that with that pause, I think also it gives the opportunity to be like, wait a minute, what did I just hear? What did they actually just say? And also, even the moment to operate from like, okay, based on who I know them to be, if I receive that from a place of harm or anger or aggression, is that who they actually are? Is that how our relationship is? I think there are so many dynamics of that we can really quickly pick apart and help us better understand, again, what we actually heard versus what was actually said. Because I think a lot of times, we're receiving something and it's not even necessarily what the person said, or largely not what the other person intended. But I think that pause really gives that opportunity to, be more well informed as a whole as to how we want to make the next move. And for some people, boundaries wise, that might need to be leaving the room because, we can start to learn more from it and realize like, oh, I actually need like 5 minutes to actually sit with this if I want to contribute in a way that's going to be impactful and it's not going to be poking a bear in this situation. And so I think that there are, different ways and different habits that could be formed that, span from that pause. I think it's just one, it's like the tip of the iceberg as far as showing up effectively in communication.
Well, and I had to add to that too. Would you agree to say that it's kind of bringing yourself back into consciousness because your subconscious is like always running? And like you said, how we're listening to these things and we hear all these things going on around us throughout the day, but we don't really recognize it until we're at that iceberg. So that pause really what does that is just kind of brings us back into awareness of where we're at and what's even going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the power of the breath in general. And it's kind of hard to take a pause and not also take a breath. And with that, it brings us right back into the present moment, which is where we are in consciousness. Like that gives us, it's so well said, Rochelle, it gives us the opportunity to really be conscious in how we are in that environment, wherever it might be. And I think from there, we're grounded in our power that we definitely wouldn't have been if it was in the flow that is largely being fed by, other people's emotional roller coasters that they're bringing into the environment.
Right.
And everybody has emotional roller coasters from time to time, except for Rochelle. She doesn't ever have any of that stuff. She's as calm as glass. It's just amazing to watch. Isn't it, Rochelle?
It's just grand.
Unless somebody pisses her off. And then it's Katie bar the door. And then it's all over.
Hey, I'm getting good at not reacting. I've noticed a lot of times, like you mentioned, Sam, when I don't react, when I'm quiet or when I smile, that's when people are like, oh, like what's about to happen next? But then when nothing even comes after that, it changes the dynamic of everything, not just yourself, but people around you in your day-to-day life. So
right. Yeah, absolutely. And it's like anything else, like when we're making these incremental changes in our lives, our environment starts to reflect those too. So whenever we're being able to show up as more present, more in our power, more, from a conscious, like I am choosing how I'm interacting with life space, then we also start to witness the other people around us doing that same thing. And so before we know it, it's one of those things where, it can be so easy, especially for people early in their journey of self-discovery and really trying to commit to making changes toward who they want to be in life, to feel like they're never going to be able to succeed because of the environment that they're in. But quantum physics proves that, as we shift the frequencies that we are, which is reflected in the habits that we have, such as that pause, our environment cannot help but change to match that. And so, for those that might have doubt, it just takes time, and it just takes patience, and it takes discipline, and it takes compassion. And, it's just those every day, just, at this time in this conversation, I'm going to consciously show up as who I want to be.
Very good.
So there are people that are saying, you want me to be, wait a minute, conscious and confident and have discipline in my conversation? That's just not going to happen because I get emotional. And then when I get emotional, Rochelle, it just kind of goes over the top, and then it can lead to a whole lot of unfortunate things. But I wanted to ask you, when you're talking about rewriting the rules, what are you referencing there?
Oh man, I feel like what you just said and then followed up with here is the perfect bridge to each other, because I know that this is how I've always been, is one of the most limiting thoughts that we could ever have for ourselves. So for those that are like, oh, I could never be disciplined in my conversations, I could never be calm and conscious in my communications, I'm just a firecracker. Like, if you choose that that's how you want to be in life, cool. If you are fed up with being in arguments all the time and you're drained and you're burnt out, or you go into every conversation and you leave just being exhausted and needing a nap, you can change that. Anybody can change if they want to change those things.
There are people wandering around this planet. I've heard them. They've said this to me, that said exactly what, hey man, I'm a fire plug. I just let it run and I let it ride. And if I'm hot, everybody knows it. But eventually that gets a little tiring, doesn't it?
Yeah, nobody wants to be around that all the time. And and if you do, then you are also that. And then, then you just have these wildfires, and then people are so sad because they feel like people can't relate to them. And it's just all these pieces like that.
Yeah. It comes into the way we view each other too. You see people like that and you know them deep down, but how they're showing up is like this completely different person.
Right. Yeah. And we all have coping mechanisms for the outside world, right? And, largely based on, one, what we grew up around, like all those habits that we learned before we were even 7 and 8 years old. But then also, the idea of internal safety is something that we all have as humans. And, in our primal nature, we want to create these spaces of safety internally. And those end up leading to some of those habits as far as who we actually show up as versus who we are behind closed doors. And, those double lives are also exhausting. You can only cut them off from each other for so long and to such degrees.
Yeah, it's true. Kevin, what do you think about that?
I was going to say, go ahead, Michelle, you're on a roll. And, but no, it's rewriting the rules. Are we talking about rewriting the rules of life, or our communication skills, or rewriting who we have always been told that we are? You're too short. You're too tall. You're too fat. You're too skinny. You're not very smart. You can't do this. You should. Okay, don't do that. When we're talking about rewriting the rules, are we saying throwing all of those out so that you can live your full life without regard to what everybody else has said that you should do or should not do, or who you could be or not be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think even just, listening to that list of examples feels overwhelming and disheartening. And especially because of all the criticisms that people grow up around, even with just like the physical aspects that they're regularly, overcoming. And especially as women, things, like comparison of how we look and how we're supposed to be versus how we actually are. And so with identity level changes, it really is just the difference in showing up based on who you've been told to be and who you want to be. And that's not something that changes overnight. That's not something you're even going to understand about yourself overnight, because so many people are walking around and operating on autopilot, in their home lives, in their work lives, throughout their businesses. It's more about finding a way to be accepted and celebrated. And for so many people, they've been doing it for so long that they're performing, right? It's a performative act in what they're doing and who they're being, instead of being true to themselves. And the idea of even understanding what it means to be true to yourself, in even for yourself, with yourself, let alone in those engaging acts or in business, that takes commitment and that takes work and that takes accountability. But those identity level shifts are things that, really will, if practiced and committed to and experimented with, those have the impact to lessen the hurt and the pain that was received. And like, oh, you're too fat. Oh, you're too skinny. Oh, you're too loud. Oh, you're too much. Oh, you need to stay in your lane. All of those things take a hit, not only on the self-esteem and on the mind, but of the heart and of the self-worth and of the confidence. And so those are things that all need to be built back up. And when we have practices that are creating habits to be doing those things and building up our confidence and building up our worth and, our courage and how we show up in the world without needing to over-explain, without needing to make excuses or try and make ourselves smaller in any way, then that ends up changing overall who we are, but also lessens the impact that other people's words can make on us.
When we come back from this break, man, this is going to take a little bit, I think, because what I want to explore with you, because you're very smart, Sam, and you're very gifted at what you do. I want to understand and have you give us some tips on how you can delete the stories that have you been told that may not be true at all, and then to take the evidence of your own self, your own life, looking in the mirror and seeing who you really are, and then understanding who that is and not letting other people, because what we tend to do is we tend to value other people's opinion of us over our own opinion of us. It is a terrible game that we play with ourselves. I would love your advice on how we can actually live a little bit better, understanding who we are, and quite frankly, not giving a crap what everybody else thinks of us. So we will be right back after this message, and stay with us. We'll be back in a minute 10.
You're listening to Brushwood Media Network, the best in syndicated talk, news, and entertainment shows.
As you go about your daily life, look closer. As you gather with family and friends who love and support you, look closer. There are youth right in your community who don't have the home, warmth, and healing you have. So look closer. Every year across America, a staggering 4.2 million youth are homeless or trafficked. And for 50 years, Covenant House has worked relentlessly to keep them safe and protected. Tonight, 2,000 young people will sleep safely in a Covenant House bed. And tomorrow, they will wake up surrounded by love. They get clean clothes, hot meals, medical care, and a safe place to sleep. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In sites across America to help them fulfill the great promise of their lives. So look closer at Covenant House. To help or get help, go to covenanthouse.org.
Welcome back to Positive Talk Radio, everybody. It's me, Brachelle, and Kevin McDonald. Of course, we've got Sam Jump with us. Go visit her website, Powerhouses With Purpose, talking about rewriting your story. And I have two subjects I'm waiting to ask, so I'm going to let Kevin continue with. I really want to hear your perspective when it comes to this. So, Kevin, if you would so kindly re-ask your question so Sam can explain.
I don't remember what it was. No. How, when we are talking about our stories and the stories that people have told us, most of them are misrepresentations of what the people actually said to us. And so, but we take it to heart. We think it's real. We think it's true. And we devalue who we are because we take somebody else's opinion of who we are over and above our own opinion of who we are. How do we get past that?
I think that, well, I know that so much of that is rooted in, again, going back to the story of whose voices do we have running in our heads. You know, a lot of times, whenever we're told that, we're dumb or that we're not enough in some way or another, or that we're not creative, those are voices that are mirroring those that we heard early on in our lives, whether that be in, elementary school, whether that be in the homes that we grew up in, whether that be how we watch each other get treated on TV when we're young, and we take those narratives and we spin them into our own storylines in our mind. And so it really requires giving ourselves regular opportunities to get quiet and really be a witness to the voices that everyone has voices going on in their head. Most people just aren't conscious enough to really be able to witness and take heed of where they're rooted. And so, the idea of taking stock of, when Kevin, you were mentioning, we're valuing other people's opinions about us more than we value our own opinions about us. And, for a lot of people, that's because even as harmful as other people's opinions might be of us, they're not as harsh as the opinions that we have about ourselves. So it can be easy to give someone else higher value and let them just take rent in our heads because the voices that are already in there are already too much to handle. So it's really about, again, being honest with ourselves in, hearing who is really reacting within us whenever we have a tendency to be reactive to others or to other things, or whenever we break down when we're offered criticism. And, all of those things are tied to other places of our subconscious that are being triggered to show up in those moments. And if we're not giving ourselves regular time in every day to really understand what narratives are running in the background of our mind, then we won't give ourselves the opportunity to take more conscious action in writing our own narratives in how we show up and in who we allow to treat us certain ways, or how much room we give them to take up in our mental health. And we just have, we learn to start valuing ourselves more when we start taking ownership of how we're showing up in our lives. And that just takes getting quiet so we can really understand the voices that are just regularly there firing off in the background.
I hate those voices that are just firing off in the background. Sometimes they can be rather mean. Rochelle, go ahead. You had a question.
Yeah, I agree with you. No, Kevin, those voices will get us to a lot of places that we don't even understand, and it's not even who we want to be, and brings us more problems with more people and situations. And then we feel guilt, and then we have to forgive ourselves, and it creates this whole routine. So to just be able to pause, coming back to that, literally creates this timeline for you to evaluate who you are and why you are. And I had this thought that you were talking about. I don't really have a question. I just want to mention, because it's kind of the way I was raised a little bit, but it's toughen up. I don't want my kids to be fragile, and I don't want this to be that. And I don't want to allow somebody to hurt my feelings. But actually, yes, I have a question. Why do we take that as I need to toughen up rather than to not let ourselves attach to it in the first place? Why aren't we teaching our kids that, or learning how to do that ourselves?
I mean, that's the outdated programming that, if you're seeing anything in, on my website or in, newsletter content, that's a perfect example of outdated programming that so many of us are just running on. And so the idea of just toughen up, people shouldn't show their emotions. So especially women in work environments have always been disregarded, especially when there is emotion that rises to the surface, or males a lot of times in general, and it's just a generational programming that's been passed along as far as emotion is weakness, vulnerability is weakness. You got to have a tough skin. You got to have skin, walk it off. And so I think that there are definitely, I think that we also hear now at this point that newer generations are being called too soft as an overcompensation of unlearning those generational patterns, is that there are people who don't necessarily know how to even receive helpful criticism. So I think that we're just watching the impacts of this pendulum swing that has happened through the last couple of generations, where it has been this thing of, talking with kids as they're being raised like you're a horse trainer versus, trying to over coddle because you were raised in that horse trainer mentality and you don't want to give them the same thing, but you don't know what that means. So it's gone the opposite direction. And so I think that we're just watching the impact of that and hanging on for the ride, because it is tough, right? I've learned that it takes a lot more strength for me to show up from a soft and gentle place than it does from that hard place. Because I too grew up in that thing of like hard, tough. I've, always been the rock for those in my family and for those in my communities and for those in my work environments. And that requires a certain, solidity in how I show up. So when I'm, all this work that I've been doing throughout the years, and especially in the last 5, where there's been a lot of work on, heart work, allowing vulnerability, allowing softness, better understanding my full self and who I want to show up as. And for my own well-being, and especially my mental health, being able to show up in a more soft and gentle way has proven healing for me and for relationships. And so it's like, rewriting the narrative around what it means to show up in emotion, what it means to feel emotion, what it means to interact with those voices when they show up in our head, right? The mind is a terrible master, but a beautiful slave, like learning how to make those things work for us. And I think it's the same thing with our relationship with our emotions or with the rigidity, understanding the why behind it. Why is that showing up? Why do I have these thoughts and emotions around like needing to be tough and needing to be strong and needing to not show weakness? Is that the relationship that I still want to have with myself and with my life? Do I still want to be criticizing myself when I feel emotion? And, those are the kinds of self-reflection questions that really give us the opportunity to take stock of who we are right now and who the future version of ourselves is trying to call forward from where we are now.
It's interesting. I wanted to ask you because parenting styles have all kinds of different things. And I was the youngest of 3. And by the time they got around to me, it was apathy. Just total, well, I don't care. Do what you want to do. If you fail, it's your deal, not mine. I don't care. And by the way, shut up or go to your room. And so how do you help people that feel less than because they were treated with apathy and I don't really care? You're the third one. And by the way, I'll just make another one if you don't do what I say and that kind of thing. But it just a total apathy kind of thing. How do you help somebody get through that to recognize that they do have legitimate worth and that they shouldn't feel less than because there was somebody in their life that treated them like a nobody?
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of times people would latch that onto like youngest child syndrome, right? And really what it comes down to is really wanting to have someone care about you or wanting someone to have something to say about what you're doing. Or, like you said, for parents, especially for so long, people were just like cranking out kids one after another. So by the time the third kid is around, like they're so burnt out and they're so exhausted that they don't have the energy to give, to another one, which that is not to blame on any child, right? And so I think it's more a thing of like really at that point, once you get to a certain stage in your life where you're trying to recover from years of feeling like you're not worth someone's attention, especially those that you care about. A lot of times we see the youngest child that's acting out for attention and then struggling to get it. So that can lead, a lot of times that can lead to, criminal activity, or that can, it will just keep continuing to get bigger and bigger to try and get the attention that they need. And for a lot of times, the attention that they end up getting isn't what they wanted in the first place, but it's hard to slow that momentum down. And then you have, others that try and go under the radar because they've been taught that they don't matter. So then they're just quietly in isolation in their minds because they don't want to bother other people because of those narratives that they've expected themselves to be feeding in their life. And so I think that it really just comes down to, at that point, again, the work with confidence, the work with worth, getting to a place where, we can do the work to build back up our own narrative around how we want to feel about ourselves. And I think that's hard too. Whenever people have gone decades thinking they're not worth that time to even do that work, or you get to the people that are like, I'm too old to change this. I've been this way for 60 years. It is hard work, but if we're just going to keep playing in that place of discontent and, not enoughness. And I feel like that's one of the biggest harms to our physical health even is being content in those places. And so I think it's just, again, taking inventory and being really honest with ourselves about those things, because there's a lot of pain in that. I'm sure that, like you said, Kevin, that there's still like residual pain that's in those spaces of feeling like you're not enough and that what you do isn't enough or worth the attention that you would love to receive.
But then the insidious part is when somebody gives you that attention, you're not discerning enough to make sure that is good attention
Right.
rather than, and so you feel like a puppy dog with I'm you're giving me attention. Oh boy, and it may not be the right person or the right attention for you.
Right. Yeah,
And that
absolutely. Yeah.
and
And I
that's got
mean,
its own set of difficulties.
yeah, absolutely. And how many stories do we hear of people in toxic and harmful relationships that they just stay in them? And it's so easy for people on the outside to criticize, like, why would they stay in those relationships? But they don't know these internal narratives around finally feeling like someone is giving them attention, even if it's not the attention that they would have initially wanted. It's better than nothing.
And
And
they
so,
don't even know
yeah,
what good attention
right,
is because they've never experienced it.
right.
By the way, we're talking with Sam Jump and Rochelle. If we wanted to go to her website, how would we get there?
Yes, visit her website, which is powerhouseswithpurpose.com. And like I said before, it is super, super cool. So check it out. You have a minute on this break.
And because everybody that we have on the show at one point or another says, it would be helpful if we could be kind to each other. Listen to this. The strength of staying kind from your friends at Positive Talk Radio. Kindness is not weakness. It takes real strength to stay kind in a world that often rewards anger, ego, and control. Being kind means choosing to act from your values, not your wounds. It means showing grace even when no one's watching. But kindness doesn't mean being passive. It doesn't mean letting people take advantage of your time, your energy, or your peace. You can be kind and still say no. You have a soft heart with firm boundaries. The strongest people I know are the ones who choose compassion without losing themselves. They've been hurt. They've been tested. And still, they choose to love and lead and to lift others anyway. Kindness is not about pleasing everybody. It's about honoring who you are and how you treat others, even when it's hard. So stay kind, stay human, and stay strong. And always remember this, be kind to one another because each other's all we've got. And welcome back to Positive Talk. Sam, I would love your opinion on that little piece.
On the kindness piece.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that kindness and compassion are some of those frequencies that we can choose to emit out into the world that, that's obviously what we could really use more of in general, and even in our own personal narratives and how we talk to ourselves, right? I think that so few people are able to offer kindness and compassion to others because of how hard they are on themselves. Again, like you were saying before, Kevin, if you don't know what the good kind of attention is, how can you know what to expect, let alone how to share it and show it? And I think that's how it is for a lot of people, especially in our culture, that understanding what kindness and compassion is and the power of it to other people, if they haven't had that shined onto them, there's no way for them to really own it as something that they have the power to emit and then choose to emit that out.
Exactly. And Rochelle has a tendency, if you don't mind me saying, that you're extraordinarily hard on yourself sometimes. And I know where that comes from. And but being hard on yourself doesn't serve you long term, because you will never reach the expectation that you have for yourself if your expectation is perfection. Do you agree, Sam?
Yeah. And I will also admit how much I resonate with all of those things that you just said about Rochelle. Especially for people who might have grown up receiving attention when they were taking actions in their life that quote unquote made them more perfect. The honor students, the, perfect attendance, like those things that are really glorified and get us the kind of attention that we would need. I think that those kind of tendencies early on can often lead to, how we show up in our lives and in our relationships with ourselves. But there is no such thing as, it's great to have goals for ourselves, but as far as like trying to attain any sort of perfectionism, it's literally impossible. And again, going back to the mind is a terrible master. if we have those habits of really beating ourselves up and berating ourselves when we slip up in any sort of way, I think that there's great power just as within that pause and being able to laugh at those kinds of things.
Yep.
And I think that in being able to do that and being able to surround ourselves with others that are doing that, I mean, my husband's one of the greatest gifts in my life as far as being able to look at life and choose joy and silliness and playfulness. And I need those kinds of examples in my life because I too can be so like, in the rigidity of wanting things to be perfect and done and complete and how I imagine them, that it can be easy to overlook that play and, and that joy in those things. And I think that, again, just going back to being able to laugh at ourselves a little bit more is choosing kindness toward ourselves. I think that's one of the biggest little things that we can really practice in how we relate.
Yeah. And if I may, Kevin, it just reminded me, my last question was going to be some sort of idea on separation. And although that's different than what I thought it would lead it into, it's perfect because when you can laugh at yourself, you also take that pause. And then there's that separation with you and your emotion, or you and someone else's behavior or their energy, or, like it can be so simple as to just, sometimes I find myself out and about and doing things. And I'm like, I just need to go sit in my car for a minute. And I just lock all the doors and I just sit with myself, or to just, like you said, go in a different room, do whatever you need to. It's important to allow yourself to have some healthy separation, even within, so that you're not taking everything and absorbing it all the time, rather than to be like, okay, I'm going to let that one bounce. And hey, that was actually a good point, and maybe I should take a look at that, because that feeds also into constructive criticism. And when you're building yourself into someone else and you try to go to people that know you and you say, hey, what's something that you think is my strength? Hey, what's something you think is my weakness? And to be able to also respond from both of those places back to them with love and compassion and thankfulness of them being aware, but also not taking it as 100%. Okay, since they said it, and my mom said this, and she sees that, it's got to be true. And that's where that separation comes in, to filter through, like you said, what you're going to allow for yourself. And in your work, I bet you do that all the time. When you finish with somebody, they get through that filter, and then you get to stay in your own ground rather than sit and think about them and worry and all those things all day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it is the reset. I think that there have been so many things that we've talked about today that are examples of the reset, and that really those resets give us, and they're great habits too. Like those are resets that can all be formed into habits that we have and practice in our lives, but they give us those opportunities to really take ownership. And I think that there's the separation aspect of it. And I think that that's part of the foundation of this work, is really separating who we have been from who we want to be. But I think also within that space in between, we have to be alchemizing that space in between and who we are in that transformational space. And I think that if we can really choose kindness and compassion to ourselves, and like you said, giving ourselves the space that we need and the pace that we need to really make sure that who we are in the becoming stage can lead to who we actually want to be. Because I think that there is a gift in separation, but I think that there's also the difference between non-attachment and detachment. And so I think it's all around the intention, in separating these things. Is this avoiding and bypassing, or is this really giving myself conscious, intentional space to do the work that I know I want for myself?
I wanted to ask you, because you said you mentioned reset. Reset yourself, and is that kind of like? Do you remember the movie City Slickers?
Oh yeah.
When I think one of the guys, the store manager that had the affair with the kid, and then he was on the trail with them, and he realized life is a big do-over. So I get to do it over. I get to start all over again. Is that what a reset is?
I mean, that would have you seen Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind? Is my rebuttal question to that. Because we see in the examples in the movie of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind what life can be like when we pluck pieces of our consciousness out that we do not want to have, whether that's memories, which a lot of times memories entail a version of us that we might not have liked, and plucking that out and how that really shifts things around us. And we see how detrimental that can really be. And so I think that resets are a moment to moment thing if we want them to be sustainable. But the idea of wiping slates entirely clean with being the humans that we are, I think that that is not possible. And I think that that can be one of those expectations that, you know, people want the quick fix, right? You know, again, the programming, the conditioning says that there's a quick fix for these things, and that's what you should be investing in. And I think that that programming and the failure rate around those quick fixes are enough to be able to show us that those resets have to just be integral pieces of recomposing ourselves. That there is no entire starting over. We hold on to too much. We have imprints from every experience, every thought, every emotion that we have going through our being. And so wiping that clean takes away the humanity of it, and that we came here to be humans.
Yeah, thank you for saying that too, because speaking of movies, it reminds me of the butterfly effect, and how he had to absorb, like, when he started to try to change things that he wanted to be different, he all of a sudden didn't know who he was. So we can actually use those things to empower us and be like, yeah, that's who I am. And I see that in that situation, and to use it for the positive effect, let's say.
Yeah, absolutely. Super well said, Rochelle. I think that, you know, every example that we have talked about, all the voices that have been in our head for so long, all of the people that have come and gone, and regardless of how they have treated us, you know, I think it's all opportunities to learn. And I think those are all tools that we can really have in our toolbox for our own well-being and personal growth. It just takes us having the courage to look at it through that lens.
Exactly. And thank you for spending all this time with us, Sam. We're running out of time. I would encourage you to come back on the show. We'll have our team send you another link, as we cannot get this all in an hour. But I want you to be able to share any way that is best to contact you, get in touch with your book, all those fun things, and then anything you'd like to finish off, any comments for our viewers.
Yeah, thanks again for mentioning the website. I had a wonderful team that worked on that with me, and that's just powerhouseswithpurpose.com.
She was very impressed with that website.
I loved it.
We all like put so much energy into it, and it came together so beautifully, and I'm regularly doing little tweaks on it myself. And yeah, it's a joy to have something that feels so reflective of, you know, like what I'd hoped it to be. So thank you. I'm on LinkedIn, and that's Samantha Jump on LinkedIn, full name. And then, I mean, really that's about it. I can be reached at connect@powerhouseswithpurpose.com, but I can be reached everywhere through the website in itself. So if you have any questions, if you want to hop on a value strategy call and understand, you know, where there might be some misalignment and how to quickly and clearly get through those next steps for yourself in your life, leadership, business, I'm here for it. It's, you know, passion, it's mission, it's dharma. It's what I do. And if you're thinking that you're not ready, good. That's when you should do it. The idea of waiting until you're ready, you're never going to be ready. And the changes don't have to be scary. They have to be small in order to stick. So they might be intimidating, but they shouldn't be scary.
Very good.
I think this whole subject is scary. It is. Change is hard, but if you are in a position where things are not going well for you, and you recognize that change would make your life go a lot better, call Sam and go to our website, which Rochelle again is.
Yes, powerhouseswithpurpose.com.
It's been a pleasure having you here, my dear, and it's just awesome. So I want to thank you for coming and talking to us and stuff, because now I got to go talk to my dad, but he's been gone for 15 years. So I don't know how I'm going to do that quite yet, but I'll figure it out. And he'll tell me something like, yeah, I know, as a dad, I sucked. But that's, you know, that I still love him. So there.
And I could guarantee that he did his best based on what he had to, which is not always an easy thing to wrap our minds around.
Well, I'm pretty sure he'd tell you he did nowhere near his best. But that was just the way it worked.
Yeah.
So Sam Jump, thank you so much for being here. Michelle, thank you. And I hope everybody has an awesome afternoon or evening or morning, whatever's next for you. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to this episode of Positive Talk with Kevin McDonald. Our purpose is to provide everyone with a positive, entertaining, and educational experience. I would love your feedback and comments about the show, including possible topics and great guest suggestions. Please email me at kevin@kmmedia.pro. And remember, be kind to one another because each other's all we've got. That's Kevin@kmmedia.pro.